quite amenable to this new role with Bonita, but as it turned out, his work required him to be away for most days through a period of 4 months. As the work progressed, the therapist learned that in addition to the instabilities in the relationships, the mother had been seriously ill at one point during the pregnancy and was hospitalized. The duration was only 1 week, but the babysitter reported that Bonita cried almost constantly and inconsolably until her father came home from work, and then again when he left to visit the mother in the hospital. Bonita's harrowing behavior included not only punching her mother, but after the baby was born, throwing things at her new sister. The therapy then centered on visits by Bonita and her mother to the therapist's office, the father coming too for some of the visits. The therapist used the opportunity to help the mother to see the connections between Bonita's outbursts and what directly preceded them. Verbalizing this, she also let Bonita know that her feelings were being understood. The therapist commented matter-of-factly when something Bonita did seemed to be a response to what had just preceded her action. The therapist was careful to underscore any constructive behavior on the part of either the mother or Bonita. Let me give a couple of examples. At the first office visit, Bonita refused to enter the playroom. She stood outside immobile and crying. Her mother tried to push and pull Bonita into the room. The therapist suggested that she and the mother just wait patiently with the door left open for Bonita. To Bonita, she said, "You do not have to come in, but you are truly welcome." Bonita did come in, but immediately clung to her mother, continuing to cry. The therapist said she thought that for whatever reason, Bonita was scared and unhappy, and wondered whether some consolation from the mother might be a little help. Bonita's mother then offered her lap to Bonita and rocked her while talking with the therapist. The crying now reminded the mother of Bonita's hysterical crying whenever they went to the hospital for any reason, but of course after the traumatic incident. She recounted lying to Bonita as to why they were going to the hospital in order to forestall Bonita's reactions. The therapist pointed out that deceiving Bonita might have increased her terror once again that she was going to lose her mother. Bonita was able to leave her mother's lap as she heard this and began to explore the toys in the room. She hesitantly brought a toy telephone to the therapist, picked up the receiver, and said, "Hello." Abruptly, she was overwhelmed again, running to her mother and crying hysterically. The therapist asked what Bonita's experience had been with telephones. Bonita's mother replied thoughtfully that during the 4th to 7th months of her pregnancy, she and Bonita stayed with her mother far away from the city where the father worked. Sometimes Bonita would talk with her father on the telephone, but she never saw him. The mother then described how much she had missed her husband, feeling lonely and depressed. The therapist wondered whether Bonita might have missed her father very much too, and perhaps been sensitive as well to how unhappy her mother was. The mother answered, "I suppose that could be true. I never thought of it that way." She had been conscious only that when they were reunited, Bonita much preferred the father, so that the mother felt she had lost the little girl's affection. This irritated her at first, and then she felt she did not care. What she cared about was that Bonita was so impossible and wild and would not mind her. When the father appeared at a session, he echoed the mother's despair over Bonita's bad disposition and lack of cognitive advance compared to other children of her age. His way of comforting Bonita was to counter the things the mother required, such as giving up of a bottle. The therapist, guessing why Bonita behaved as she did at each point, encouraged the mother to see spontaneously, after a while, what Bonita needed. The therapist underscored the mother's increasing ability to be responsive to Bonita. The parents found that preparing Bonita honestly for what was to occur imminently made a great difference to her. The therapist also helped the parents to agree on general principles of their treatment of Bonita. These discussions in front of the child were reflected in Bonita's becoming freer and freer to play contentedly to herself while they talked. At home, she felt free to join her mother in a new mode of playfulness while attending to the baby sister. She began to be able to play with other children. Her language development was notable. In this case, within months, a destructive pattern of Bonita's self-image and her confusions and fears were dissipated. Parents and children settled into gratifying ways of being together. This result was not due to psychoanalytic voodoo. The parents and Bonita learned that her behavior was out of desperation, not inborn badness, nor some trickiness of her brain. Both respect for Bonita's autonomy and her need for reassurance could be acknowledged once the reasons for her behavior were in focus. A key learning was to anticipate situations that might be puzzling or scary for Bonita and help her to know in advance what to expect. The sudden changes that occurred from the start of her mother's second pregnancy had been understandable by Bonita only as evidence that she was inadequate and bad. Her father's new understanding led him to encourage Bonita's age-appropriate development rather than his encouraging her to hold on to being a baby. Both parents observed how Bonita's backwardness was being outgrown. The effect on Bonita was to be able to enjoy the specialness of her relationship with her father in the context of a whole, loving family. It does not take much imagination to see how Bonita's unconscious, taking form at this age, could have been geared to a fundamental sense of herself as a bad and uncontrollable creature who must not lose her babyishness. If untreated, her intellectual abilities would have been relatively inaccessible. She would not have been able to play with other children satisfyingly, and her aggressive stance would shift only when she vacillated into unpleasantly clinging behavior toward her mother. Fast forward to school age, when children are usually diagnosed, and a typical ADHD picture or bipolar would be identified. The lessons from these cases confirm that close study of the interaction of the child so diagnosed will reveal why the child's behavior is so difficult to live with for the child, no less than for the child's parents. A normal degree of sibling rivalry erupts into a vicious extreme because the sibling's presence earmarks other problems of the child as the family dynamics are played out. The unreasonableness of the child's behavior signals a need for understanding what is below the surface of ordinary observation, but not below the surface of what can be understood. Freud long ago recognized that anxiety is at the core of unacceptable behavior. Psychoanalytic insight provides a guide to the elements that influence the child's personality. It is popular these days to recognize that when pet animals act in unpleasant ways, there are underlying fears that must be countered. That much understanding surely belongs as well to our children. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to introduce Jim Gottstein. He received his Juris Doctor degree from Harvard Law School in 1978 and has been practicing law in Alaska for 25 years, including being an attorney advocate for people diagnosed with serious mental illnesses. Among many other things, he served as plaintiff's counsel in the successful billion-dollar litigation over Alaska's misappropriation of the million-acre Alaska Mental Health Trust, and recently won a landmark Alaska Supreme Court forced drugging case of Myers versus Alaska Psychiatric Institute. Mr. Gottstein is president and devotes the bulk of his time pro bono to the Law Project for Psychiatric Rights, Psych Rights, whose mission is to organize a serious, coordinated legal effort around the country against forced psychiatric drugging. Jim is also president of Soteria Alaska, Choices Incorporated, and the National Association of Rights Protection and Advocacy, NARPA, and serves on the board of directors of ICSPP and Peer Properties, and served on the Alaska Mental Health Board for 5 years. Jim is quite a person. I spent 2 weeks with him this summer in Alaska, and all he did was work, except for about 3 hours when he did the only fun he has, I think, because I think his work is his fun, and he took me up in an airplane for 3 or 4 hours and terrified me. Actually, he made it really comfortable for me to fly in one of those single-engine planes. He's an accomplished pilot. He's a very bright man, and he's a man who has literally dedicated his whole life to helping people, basically pro bono. I keep trying to encourage him to make money. He has little schemes that he gets me involved with, but to make money. But basically, he goes from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening working on behalf of people, the disenfranchised. And I give you Mr. Jim Gottstein.
Is that right side? Thank you very much. It turns out, actually, I'm leaving the board of directors of Soteria, Alaska, and Choices, Inc. because I've been in the position, basically, of biting the hand, or biting the hand that I'm trying to get to feed us with getting funding for Soteria, Alaska, and Choices, Inc. And they're both, Choices, Inc. began operations a couple months ago, and Soteria, Alaska has been funded for opening next year by the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority. But the Trust Authority, I've really created some problems, or let's say consternation within the state, and we really need to get both of these programs supported by the state. And so anyway, I'll be leaving, but I'm leaving it in great hands. We've got a new, a director, Susan Musante, who is like a godsend, really, in terms of those two programs. How many people were here last year? And how many weren't? Okay, good. So I really, the first thing I want to say, I should start out with a joke, but I can't remember any, but Lloyd, can you help me out? I really, first off, I think actually a number of people here know more about legal rights of parents and children than I do, and I intend to rectify that in the near future. But I think there really